One of the biggest decisions our country faces is fast approaching. For many, it's a question of economics. Will we be better or worse off inside or outside the European Union? Has the EU helped or hindered us financially? It certainly helped Cardigan Bay Watersports. The new key business first took to the sea back in 2003, thanks, in large part, to an EU grant of almost £165,000.
It was a significant element of that set-up fund. At the moment, you'd have to suggest that there's been a lot of money has come to West Wales. This is a poorer part of the UK, and you have to question whether a centralised government would devote as much of its scarce resource in this direction.
Now, this structural funding, as it's known in the jargon, that Cardigan Bay Watersports was able to access is Brussels' way of boosting the poorer parts of the European Union. Back in 1999, when Wales first qualified for this economic aid, the then First Minister, Rhodri Morgan, hailed it as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. But 17 years later, and this part of Wales still qualifies for the highest level of support. By 2020, the West Wales and the Valleys region will have received almost £4.75 billion in EU funds. East Wales, a relatively richer region of the EU, will have received over £600 million. To date, some 3,000 projects have had access to the funds that have created an estimated 88,000 jobs. But despite the investment, the West Wales and the Valleys region, according to the latest EU figures, remains the poorest in the UK, unable to bridge the wealth gap with the rest of the European Union. In the early days, the money is said to have been handled poorly, spread too thinly. This fish farm on Anglesey wasn't monitored properly, while this rural heritage centre in Gwynedd failed. Officials say improvements have been made, and the focus is now on fewer but bigger projects, such as the newly opened Swansea University campus. But for those campaigning for us to leave, there is no such thing as EU money.
It is like a propaganda thing to them in a way, because they get these signs up everywhere saying that this project was funded by the European Union. People then think, "Oh, the European Union is good, isn't it? It gives us all this money." They forget that we're paying £55 million a day to be part of this club.
Last month, David Cameron said that there was no certainty that this economic aid would continue under a new UK government if Britain were to vote to leave the EU. Just a few days later, Andrew Davies, the Welsh Conservative leader, said he could guarantee it would. It gives you a flavour of the conflicting arguments from both sides of a campaign based on so many unknowns. James Williams, BBC Wales Today, Newquay.
Our political reporter James Williams has been at the launch at the Cardiff City Stadium. James, the Conservatives say only they can offer change.
Yeah, absolutely, Rebecca. They've certainly got a spring in their step. They say that after 17 years of Labour failure running Wales, people are looking for change, and that they are the party that can truly offer change, because they say the other opposition parties in Cardiff Bay at the moment, Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats, well, they're more likely of propping up a minority Labour party. Now, on the issue of Labour failure, expect to hear a lot from the Conservatives on that during the course of the campaign, particularly the way the Welsh Labour government has run the NHS. It was a strong campaign theme for the Conservatives during last year's general election campaign.
Our political reporter James Williams is in Westminster for us tonight. James, this isn't the first time for Wayne David to criticise Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, is it?
No, it's not, Jamie. Cast your mind back to November and you may recall that Wayne David was pretty critical of Jeremy Corbyn after a string of negative headlines saying he had a heck of a lot to learn, but that he was offering him advice and that he was in fact learning. Well, fast forward 2 months and the Caerphilly MP and Labour frontbencher still isn't really mincing his words after what must be said, even in relative terms, has been a pretty bruising few days for the Labour leadership here in Westminster. Now, Wayne David was asked whether he agreed with his fellow Labour MPs that this had been one of the worst reshuffles ever. And this is what he had to say.
We're live now to Brussels and our political reporter James Williams. James, this is crunch time, isn't it, for David Cameron's renegotiation?
Yes, absolutely, Lucy. Tonight's working dinner is the first formal opportunity for all 28 EU leaders to discuss David Cameron's renegotiation plans at length. Now, as we understand it, 3 of the 4 changes that the Prime Minister wants to see are making good progress. But there is resistance to the 4th, namely his plan to prevent EU migrant workers from claiming benefits. Our economic future, the security of the nation, fundamental questions about the UK's role and place in the world. The EU referendum stakes couldn't be higher. And while some of the biggest political players have shown their cards, others are keeping them close to their chests. In 1975, the last time we were asked to decide on the UK's relationship with Europe, the trades union movement and the traditional left were hostile to the European Economic Community as it was then. It was seen by them as no more than a capitalist club. And their opposition would continue long after the UK resoundingly voted in that referendum almost 41 years ago to remain a member of the EEC. But things changed as the 80s progressed and Margaret Thatcher's Conservatives landed a series of devastating electoral blows on the Labour Party. Battered and bruised, Labour and the unions turned to Brussels. And this man, Jacques Delors' proposal during the 1988 Trades Union Congress to place a social dimension at the heart of Europe in order to advance workers' rights. Now, Jacques Delors, the European Commission president at the time, the villain of the piece for so long as far as the unions were concerned, all of a sudden became their knight in shining armour. A shift articulated at the time by this union boss.
The only card game in town at the moment is in a town called Brussels. And it's a game of poker where we've got to learn the rules and learn them fast.
So with another referendum on the UK's future in Europe on the horizon, where do the unions now stand? Just some of the voices with a Welsh accent in a national conversation of more than 4 million. But with the referendum hanging in the balance, every vote will count. Whatever happens tomorrow, there is a promise that change is coming to this place, the Scottish Parliament. But it's far less certain where that leaves Wales, as that conversation has only just begun. James Williams, BBC Wales Today in Edinburgh. For decades, the Corona Man delivered pop to doors across the country. The fizzy drinks company was a Welsh success story, part of the cultural brew, and it all began in a small factory in Porth at the foot of the Rhondda Valleys. The doors may have closed on the former Corona factory, but fizzy drinks are still very much a part of Welsh life. But because of their high sugar content, drinking fizzy drinks regularly has been shown to increase the risk of obesity and other health problems. So, an idea of the Plaid Cymru policy production line is the introduction of a pop tax. Research commissioned by the party shows that a 20% tax on the price of fizzy drinks could cut the number of people in Wales who are obese by some 8,000 and the overweight by more than 13,000. It's a policy that could raise up to £45 million a year, but the study warns that the extra tax is likely to hit people on lower incomes hardest. Plaid set out its stall, so we took ours to the people of Porth. Would they pay £1.79 instead of £1.49?